Hello, this is Dr. Scott Denstead, founder of the EZWxBrief progressive web app. Thanks for tuning in. Let's talk a little bit about how to use EZWxBrief to plan a flight with some of the various different convective forecasts in EZWxBrief. Now we're going to plan a flight here from KUNV to KSASG. Now I've got all the map layers turned off for a good reason. We don't want to worry about what's happening here on the map right now. We're going to look at some of the convective forecasts in EZWxBrief to gauge whether or not this flight could be taken, or at least have an easy attempt to be able to make this flight, given the fact there is some convection expected along this particular flight that I have planned. So here's our routes. Again, it's direct flight from UNV State College to Springdale, ASG, in northwestern part of Arkansas. And let's say we're planning this flight earlier in the morning. So we're looking right now, it's 2020 Zulu right now. So this is in the afternoon. So I wanted to basically be able to show you the actual weather that occurred when we get to the end, so you can see how all this is put together. But just pretend we were looking at this earlier in the morning, trying to gauge whether or not we could make this particular flight. So in this particular case, again, I'm excluding all the other information that you may get on the map display itself, including forecast radar, all the various different easy forecasts that you'll see. Again, not to try to influence you on your decisions, but you do see here that everywhere, for the most part, over the next next several days, all the departure advisor here is showing up red. And that's primarily because in this particular situation, we're looking at a scenario where we have en route convective potential at the very high level showing up for this particular route. So without a doubt, the departure advisor tells you got to kind of work a little bit harder to figure out what's happening with the convection. And so if we look at how I have my minimum set up here, I have my en route convective potential set up here as very high, meaning anything that's very high will essentially show up as red on the departure advisor. Anything that's essentially moderate or less will show up as green. So that means essentially we're dealing with a very high scenario that will run into convection somewhere along this route of flight based on what we see on the departure advisor here. So first of all, let's take a look and drill down using some of the various different products. First of all, we're going to look at the Storm Prediction Center's convective outlooks. Now this is the day one convective outlook. Now this is later in the day, but it really didn't look much different from this morning's forecast. But this definitely shows there's a slight risk of severe weather here showing up in yellow, and a marginal risk showing up in this dark green area. Now this really represents a pretty wide time frame here. In this case, when it's issued, it's usually from 12Z to 12Z, but they've updated it several times throughout the day because we're looking at this a little bit later in the afternoon. But nevertheless, still was pretty much similar to what you see here. The one particular product I like to look at is a little bit further, and you advance the time slider here until you get to what's essentially the high resolution thunderstorm outlook. Now, high resolution meaning resolution of time, because you can see this is valid from 12Z to 16Z showing up here. Then you slide it to the right. This is the 16 to 20Z. And the one we're concerned about here, because we're making this flight during the 20Z to 0Z time frame in this particular case, you can see that we are showing up three kind of hot spots here. One up here in Wisconsin, here in the Indiana area, and down here in Florida. And then you see a 40% region showing up all along this outside of this area too. So can you make a flight from central Pennsylvania over to northwest Arkansas here? Certainly you might have some problems moving through that area in a direct flight. That may not work for us. But is it possible that we could maybe find a path through here, and a safe path where we're not subjecting ourselves to a lot of potential convective turbulence by flying through any major thunderstorms or deep convection, but instead maybe there is a path that we could make our way through here and do so and feeling pretty confident. Well, this product gives us that first look in terms of where the hot spots are of concern. This basically defines, if you take any point, it says basically 12 miles around that point, this is the percentage, trying to get some kind of good understanding that says you basically this probabilistic forecast expresses the best estimate of a thunderstorm occurring within 12 miles of that particular point. So anywhere you're in the 70% area or 40% area, there's a 70% chance that just 12 miles from that point, you're going to see a thunderstorm, or in the 40% area, there's a 40% chance within 12 miles of that point, you're going to see a thunderstorm. So that's kind of how you look at this. So let's take a peek, and I'm not looking at the prog charts because the only prog chart that's valid right now is actually the 0Z prog, and that's not going to help at all. Is one of the products I like to look at here, at least at a very big picture, is to look at the HREF model, and we'll look at the CONUS level so we can see the entire United States, and we'll look at the 30,000 foot ecotops forecast. Now this is the 12Z issuance, so this was done in the morning, so this would be available to you in the morning time frame or late morning time frame. And I'll zoom in on this a little bit, and you can immediately see as I advance this to 20Z, the time frame that we're kind of looking to depart. So on this flight from central part of Pennsylvania over to northwest Arkansas, you can see that, yes, we've got those 3 hot spots kind of showing up there. And then there's this other one that doesn't show up as a hot spot in the sense of on the thunderstorm product that we saw from the Storm Prediction Center, but it's something we should be concerned about. So this product here tells us a probability. It shows us a probability, not a probability of thunderstorms, but a probability that the ecotops, or the top of the precipitation core, will be above 30,000 feet. And when those numbers are in the 60, 70, 80, 90% area, you can guarantee you're going to be dealing with some convection that will essentially develop and penetrate through the 30,000 foot. So that's deep convection and something we want to stay away from. But the fact that this matches pretty well with what we saw in terms of that 40% area all the way down through here, and certainly the 70% area showing up in these 2 locations. But this also indicates that, yes, we're going to see a likelihood that a lot of the convection in Tennessee and North Carolina, South Carolina, that area, could possibly also be in that situation. But it leaves a couple of situations where we could say maybe we can make that trip, and there's even some convection going on here up in parts of New York and Pennsylvania that we got to be worried about on departure. But if we were departing out of central part of Pennsylvania, we definitely would not want to be trying to go through this area like that. But we might be able to find ourselves a spot going through here, or maybe even to the north of this. And yes, it's a major deviation that we would have to carry extra fuel to get there, or even maybe have a fuel stop somewhere in that area and recheck weather once we land. But this gives us a little bit more hope. Now the real prize to look at, the one that's going to really give us that information we want to make a good decision, would be this forecast radar from the same model. So this is the high resolution ensemble forecast model, but this is the forecast reflectivity or forecast radar depiction. And again, this gives us a very same situation. This is the 12Z run of the model. This would be available sometime before you depart, but you can see very clearly here, before even the first area of convection develops, you can see that we definitely have those 3 hot spots of concern. Again, going up here in Wisconsin, all the way down in this region, Indiana and Illinois. Here's that area, the possibility of seeing something in the Carolinas and Tennessee, and also down here in Florida as well. But you can see here that this actually looks fairly reasonable. Yes, there's some possible convection possibly coming up here around our departure area. You see a lot of very dotted areas. This is simulating what the next rad or what the forecast radar might the radar might look like in the future. But this is not anywhere near problematic. We could certainly probably find our way through some of this area without too much difficulty, as long as we, stay visual and not worry about necessarily having to deal with a lot of deviations except planning a route through those regions. So that gives us at least some comfort level. If we were to run this a little bit more in the future, you can even see that it moves that way, and it kind of opens up a little bit, especially down here towards South Carolina, North Carolina, and Tennessee. In that area, kind of opens up pretty nicely as a way to get from point A to point B without too much difficulty. And so now let's take a look at really what happens, or what's happening right now. We can look at the MRMS composite reflectivity. This is again looking at 2022Z, so this is fairly close to the current time. And if we were departing out of this area, it does show that hey, there's a area here up near Pennsylvania. We saw that on the 30,000 foot ecotops forecast. There's our kind of mesoscale convective system in that region, and we see that area up here in Wisconsin and also in the Carolinas and Tennessee showing up as well, and down here in Florida. So this really seemed to, the forecast seemed to work really well with understanding what might happen. And so therefore, if we, as long as we depart safely out of our airport, we could definitely find a route without a doubt through this region without running into too much in the way of any significant convection. Now, there could be buildups that we have to work around that are not actually producing any precipitation, or if we're flying the aircraft up in the flight levels, we may be able to fly over some of that stuff, because most of that was not necessarily guaranteed to be up there in the 30,000 foot range or higher. There was a low probability of that. So either one of these two routes probably would work for us in that particular sense. So this kind of gives you a way to how to pull some of these different forecasts together to be able to make good decisions. Now, in the end, you're going to look at other products. You're going to look at forecasts, prog charts. You're going to look at terminal forecasts for your departure airport, your destination, and also you want to make sure that you have ample forecasts that are available to other airports to go to in the event that for some reason the weather wasn't exactly as forecast and you had to make a beeline for another airport. Those terminal forecasts become good information to know where to go in the event you have to divert. They don't make good area forecasts, or they don't make zone forecasts necessarily, but if you have to go there, those terminal forecasts would be a godsend to be able to know that, hey, this particular forecast is not forecasting convection at this particular time. So again, you want to wrap this all into other forecasts in addition, but this just gives you a little bit of a microcosm of some of the forecasts to use to determine whether or not you can actually make a flight when convection is fairly significant along that route of flight.